She handed me the envelope without even turning around. We were standing in front of the architecture building, bathed in light and the sound of applause. Her name had just been announced from the stage, and people around her were congratulating her, hugging her, taking photos. And I was holding the divorce papers in my hands, the day of her graduation. "I've already signed everything," she said calmly, almost casually, as if they weren't talking about marriage, but a lease. I opened the envelope automatically. The date, the signature, the legally sound wording. Everything had been prepared in advance. This wasn't an impulsive decision. It had been planned. I asked why today? Why now? She looked at me the way someone looks at something long decided. 5 years, she said. I've been working towards this for 5 years. My studies are over. I have offers from architectural firms. I need to start the next chapter. And you were part of the last one. 5 years. 5 years of support, temporary jobs, abandoning plans. 5 years of being told to be patient. It's temporary, when I finish. And then she graduated. And I was an extra in the frame. All around, people were laughing, cameras were clicking, parents were hugging the graduates. The world was celebrating her victory, and mine was reduced to one thought. She had chosen the moment when she felt most powerful to end it. That day, I realized, for her, this divorce was part of her final project. Pure, precise, without emotion. And my name was no longer in the final version. When people talk about her success, they love to say it didn't come easy. They're right, but they never talk about who paid the price while she was getting there. For 5 years, our life revolved around her architecture program. Not in a romantic, supportive movie way. In a quiet, grinding, day-after-day way that slowly erased everything else. I took the stable job because one of us had to. I covered rent when her internships paid experience instead of money. I learned how to stretch groceries, how to say no to trips, how to pretend it was fine when my plans kept getting pushed back another semester. Her nights belonged to drafting tables and glowing screens. Models, blueprints, critiques that tore her work apart and sent her back to the start. I was the one bringing coffee at midnight, listening to her panic before reviews, telling her she wasn't a fraud when professors made her feel like one. When she talked about quitting, I talked her out of it. When she cried, I stayed. From the outside, it looked like a partnership. Inside, it felt more like a long waiting room. Just until this project is over. Just until next year. Just until I graduate. I believed her every time. Friends praised her discipline. Family admired her ambition. People told me how lucky I was to have such a driven wife. No one noticed how small my world had become, or how often my needs were labeled, "not right now." By the time she crossed that stage with her diploma, everyone saw a strong, independent architect who had sacrificed so much. What no one saw was that the sacrifices weren't shared evenly, and that I had already been slowly written out of the picture. No one ever called it that out loud. No one said, "You're paying for her dream." It was framed as teamwork, as temporary sacrifice, as what couples do. But when I look back now, the numbers tell a clearer story than our memories ever did. Tuition checks came out of my account. Software licenses, materials, printing fees for oversized plans that barely fit through the door, my card. When her laptop died the week before a major deadline, I didn't hesitate. When studio fees went up unexpectedly, I adjusted our budget again. I stopped counting how many times I told myself, it's an investment. In us. She worked, technically. Short-term internships, underpaid positions that boosted her resume but barely covered gas. I was the steady one. The boring one. The safety net that made her risk-taking possible. While she talked about future firms and design philosophies, I worried about interest rates, rent increases, and how long we could keep pretending this was balanced. What stings isn't just the money. It's the way it slowly became invisible. The checks, the overtime, the things I gave up, they were absorbed into the background of her story. By the end, people talked about her discipline, her sacrifices, her grit. Somewhere along the way, my support stopped being appreciated and started being assumed. Like electricity in a building, only noticed once it's gone. And standing there on graduation day, divorce papers in my hand, I finally understood something brutal. I didn't just help her build a career. I financed an exit. That day was supposed to belong to us. Not just to her diploma, not just to the photos and congratulations, but to the quiet understanding that we had survived something hard together. I woke up that morning thinking about dinner reservations, about finally taking a breath, about how this was the finish line we'd been running towards side by side. I stood in the crowd while she crossed the stage, clapping until my hands hurt. I smiled for pictures. I held her bag while professors shook her hand. Everyone kept saying, "You must be so proud." And I was. I really was. I thought this was the moment where all the waiting paid off. But even then, something felt off. She moved through the day like I was an accessory, not a partner. Her attention slid past me toward classmates, future colleagues, people who spoke her new language. When I tried to pull her aside, she said, "Later," again and again, the same word I'd been hearing for years. We never got that quiet moment. There was no "we did it." No shared relief. Just a widening space between us, hidden behind smiles and applause. I didn't know yet that she had already rewritten the meaning of the day. For me, it was the end of a long struggle together. For her, it was a clean beginning, one that didn't include me. The ceremony ended quickly. People were hugging, laughing, making plans for the evening. Parents were taking photos of their children as if it were the happiest day of their lives. I stood in the parking lot next to the car and waited for her, mentally planning where we would go for dinner. I even washed the car that morning. I wanted everything to be perfect. She was the last one out, still in her gown, with a folder under her arm. I stepped toward her with a smile, already raising my hand to hug her, but she stopped a meter away. No smile. No kiss. Just a tired, cold gaze. Instead of a hug, she handed me a thick brown envelope. "What is this?" I asked, not even understanding it at first. "Documents," she answered evenly. "For a divorce." I already signed it. The words sounded so calm, as if she'd said she'd forgotten to buy bread. I looked at the envelope, then at her, expecting her to laugh and say it was a stupid joke. But nothing happened. "Are you serious?" "Today," was all I could manage. "Yes. It's a logical time," she shrugged. "I've closed one chapter of my life. It's time to start another." Around us, people were laughing, slamming car doors, discussing plans. And I stood on the pavement, holding the end of our marriage in my hands, sealed in an ordinary office envelope. No scandal, no explanation, just a signature and a period. And it was at that moment that I realized this day was important only to her, and I no longer meant anything in her new life. I finally opened the envelope there in the parking lot, not because I wanted to, but because my hands did it themselves. The papers were neatly laid out, everything filled out in advance, without rushing. She hadn't made this decision today. Today, she simply voiced it. I looked up at her and asked, almost in a whisper, "Why now?" She sighed, as if tired of explaining the obvious, and said something I'll remember forever. She said it in English, clearly, without emotion. "I don't need you anymore. It's not that we grew apart. It's not that it's complicated. It's not that I'm confused. Simply, I don't need you anymore." I remained silent, and she, as if feeling the need to finish, added, "You were part of the process. But that phase is over." Part of the process. A phase. As if I were a temporary tool, not the person who had carried her dream on her shoulders for 5 years. I asked who I had been to her all that time. She looked at me calmly and said another phrase, also in English, as if it would be easier to cut it off that way. "You supported me, and I'm grateful. But support is not a future. Support is not a future. And that means neither am I." These words weren't accompanied by shouting or anger. That's what made them so heavy. She spoke confidently, like an architect who has completed a project and no longer sees the point of discussing the drawings. At that moment, I realized one thing. Some phrases don't need repeating. They only need to be heard once for them to change you forever. People ask me why I signed the papers right there, without arguing, without reading every page, without trying to slow things down. The truth is simple, even if it sounds strange. By the time she handed me that envelope, the marriage was already over. The signatures were just ink catching up to reality. I looked at the documents, but my mind wasn't on asset lists or legal language. I was replaying her words over and over again. "I don't need you anymore." Once someone says that out loud, clearly and calmly, there is nothing left to negotiate. If I had argued, what would I have been fighting for? To convince someone to stay with me out of guilt? To beg for a place in a life where I was already classified as a completed phase? I wasn't interested in being tolerated. I wanted to be chosen. Signing those papers wasn't weakness. It was clarity. I realized something standing there in that parking lot. The moment she stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as a tool, the relationship had already lost its foundation. You can't rebuild something that was only valuable as long as it was useful. I also knew myself well enough to understand what would happen if I didn't sign. There would be months of arguments, lawyers, tension, late-night conversations going nowhere. I would be dragged through a slow goodbye, bleeding energy into someone who had already emotionally checked out. So I picked up the pen. Each signature felt strangely calm. Not dramatic, not angry, just final. Like closing a door you already walked through months ago without noticing. She watched me closely while I signed, probably expecting tears, questions, or a last attempt to change her mind. Instead, she got silence. That seemed to confuse her more than any outburst could have. When I handed the envelope back, I felt something lift off my chest. For 5 years, I had been carrying responsibility that wasn't mine anymore. Dreams that weren't shared. A future that only went one direction. 3 days after the parking lot, I was gone. Not just gone from the apartment, but gone from her world entirely. I did not announce it. I did not explain it. I did not leave a note taped to the fridge like in the movies. I simply stopped existing in the life she thought she was about to move forward without me. Those 3 days were quiet and focused. While she was celebrating her graduation, answering congratulations, and talking about her next chapter, I was closing doors one by one. I packed only what mattered. Clothes, personal documents, tools I had collected over the years, a few things that still felt like me. Everything else stayed behind. If it had been part of our life, she could keep it. I changed my phone number first. That felt symbolic, like cutting a wire. Then I closed the joint account and moved my money into a new bank she had never heard of. I canceled the utilities that were under my name. Internet, electricity, subscriptions. Quiet actions with loud consequences. On the last morning, I walked through the apartment one final time. It didn't feel sad. It felt empty, like a place that had already stopped being home long before I decided to leave. Her architecture books were stacked neatly on the desk. My side of the closet was almost bare. That told me everything I needed to know. I loaded my truck before sunrise. No music, no rush, just the sound of boxes shifting and the city waking up around me. When I pulled out of the parking lot, I did not look back. Not because I was trying to be strong, but because there was nothing left to see. I crossed state lines that same day. No dramatic goodbye, no final argument, just distance growing mile by mile. I wanted a place where nobody knew my story, where my name did not automatically belong to someone else's success. A place where I was not the guy who supported her, but just a man starting over. Disappearing was not revenge. It was survival. Starting over sounds romantic until you actually do it. In reality, it looks like a cheap motel room, a suitcase on the floor, and silence so loud it keeps you awake at night. I did not move somewhere glamorous. I picked a city where I knew no one and no one knew me. That was the point. No history, no explanations. The first week was all logistics. I found a small one-bedroom apartment with thin walls and a view of a parking lot. It was nothing like the place we shared, and that made it perfect. Everything in it belonged to me. Every decision was mine. No compromises. No quiet resentment. Finding work came next. I took a job that paid less than what I used to make, but it was honest, steady, and didn't require me to sacrifice my entire life for someone else's future. I showed up, did my job, went home. Nobody asked about my past. Nobody cared who I used to be married to. The nights were the hardest at first. After years of revolving my schedule around someone else's deadlines and stress, the emptiness felt unfamiliar. I would catch myself thinking about whether she had eaten, whether she was studying, whether she needed anything. Then I would remember. She had made it clear she didn't need me anymore. Slowly, the silence stopped feeling like loss and started feeling like peace. I built small routines. Morning coffee alone. Evening walks after work. Weekends where nothing was canceled at the last minute. I slept better than I had in years. I laughed more, even if it was just at stupid things on television. For the first time in 5 years, my energy was not being drained into someone else's ambition. It stayed with me. This new life was simple, quiet, sometimes lonely, but it was honest. And every day I woke up knowing that whatever I built from here on out would be mine. Not borrowed, not temporary, not waiting to be discarded. I was no longer supporting someone else's dream. I was finally allowed to have my own. Did not hear about her struggles right away. At first, there was silence. The kind she probably assumed would break with me calling, apologizing, asking to fix things. When that did not happen, reality started creeping in for her, slowly, then all at once. The first issue was money. Not because she was broke, but because she was finally responsible. For the first time in years, there was no shared account quietly covering gaps, no second income smoothing over mistakes. Rent was due every month, on time. Utilities did not care about career potential. Groceries did not accept promises about future success. Then came the workload. Architecture was not the glamorous creative life she had imagined while studying. Long hours, demanding clients, endless revisions, and junior-level pay that did not match her expectations. She was talented, yes, but talent did not protect her from exhaustion. I heard later that she started canceling plans with friends, always tired, always stressed. The same way I used to cancel my own life to support hers. Her car needed repairs. She complained about it to mutual acquaintances, saying it was bad timing. I almost laughed when I heard that. Bad timing had been my entire marriage. She began reaching out indirectly, asking people how I was doing, saying she hoped I was adjusting, framing it like concern, not regret. But concern does not ask questions through other people. The hardest part for her, from what I was told, was realizing that nothing was falling apart dramatically. There was no big disaster she could point to and blame, just a series of small pressures adding up, things I used to handle quietly, without applause or acknowledgement. For the first time, she was standing alone inside the life she had wanted so badly, and it was heavier than she expected. The panic did not hit her all at once. It came in waves. First, it was small things. Asking mutual friends if they had heard from me. Casual questions, framed like curiosity. Is he doing okay? Does he still live around here? Nobody thought much of it at first. Then the questions changed. Do you know where he went? Does he have a new number? Did he say anything about moving? That is when people realized she was not just wondering. She was looking. I found out later that she tried emailing me from an old account I barely remembered. Short messages. Neutral tone. No apologies yet. Just openings. Hey, I hope you're well. I think we should talk. 5 years is a long time to disappear like this. I never replied. The silence made her spiral. She checked social media obsessively, even though I had deleted everything. She asked coworkers if they had any contacts in other states. She reached out to my sister, then my cousin, then an old college friend I had not spoken to in years. Each time, she heard the same thing. He doesn't want to be found. That answer scared her more than anger ever could. Because anger meant emotion. Silence meant finality. I was told she started imagining worst-case scenarios. That I was broken. That I was lost. That I was waiting for her to fix things. Panic does that. It rewrites reality into something survivable. But the truth was simpler and harder to accept. I was not missing. I was not hiding. I was not waiting. I had chosen a life where she was no longer part of the equation. And once she understood that, the search stopped being about me. It became about her. She did not find me the way people imagine. No dramatic reunion, no movie-style coincidence. She found me because desperation makes people reckless. One afternoon, my phone lit up with a number I did not recognize. I ignored it. Then it rang again. And again. By the 5th call, I knew exactly who it was, even before a single voicemail came through. She had figured it out. Not my exact address at first, but the city, the company, the general outline of the life I had built without her. I later learned she showed up at my old workplace, then another, asking questions that made people uncomfortable. She told them she was my wife. She said there was an emergency. There was no emergency, just regret wearing a costume. When she finally stood in front of me, weeks later, it was in a parking lot outside a hardware store. No warning, no build-up, just her voice saying my name like it still belonged to her. She looked different, tired, thinner, less certain. I've been looking for you, she said, like that alone explained everything. I felt nothing, no anger, no relief, just a quiet clarity. You found me, I said. Now what? She started talking fast. Apologies mixed with explanations. Stress, fear, pressure. She said she had made a mistake, that she did not mean those words. That 5 years should count for something. I listened, calmly, completely. Then I told her the truth she was not ready for. Finding me did not mean getting me back. She had not discovered a lost husband. She had run into a man who had already moved on. 3 years had passed since the day I disappeared from her life, but standing there, it felt like two different timelines colliding. She kept looking at me like she was searching for the version of me she left behind. The tired man who worked extra hours. The one who adjusted his life around her deadlines and ambitions. That man never showed up. Instead, she was facing someone steady, grounded, someone who no longer needed explanations to survive. "You look different," she said quietly. "So do you," I replied, and I meant it. Not just physically. There was a nervousness in her that used to belong to me. She tried to rewind time with memories. Inside jokes. Stories from our past. As if 5 years of sacrifice and one brutal afternoon could be softened by nostalgia. I let her talk. I let her try. But the truth sat between us, heavy and unmoving. That day on the parking lot had not been an argument. It had been a decision. Final. Clean. She asked if I was happy. Not casually, carefully. "Yes," I said, without hesitation. That was the moment she understood. Not when I left. Not when I signed. But right then, I was not waiting anymore. And for the first time, she realized the future she planned never included me, until she needed me back. The real ending did not come with shouting or dramatic words. It came quietly, the way all irreversible things do. She stood there waiting for something. Forgiveness. Hope. Maybe a crack in my resolve she could slip through. I could see it in her eyes. She still believed there was a version of this conversation where I would soften. "I just want to know where we stand," she said. "After everything." That was when I realized she still thought this was unfinished business. That there was a thread left to pull. "There is no way to stand anywhere," I said calmly. "That ended a long time ago." Her face tightened. "So that's it. 5 years just erased." "No," I answered. 5 years were lived. Then they were concluded. She tried to explain herself again. Pressure, fear, ambition, bad timing. The same words, rearranged. I listened without interrupting, not because I was persuaded, but because I no longer needed to defend my choice. When she finished, I said the one thing she did not expect. "I don't hate you. I just don't belong to you anymore." That broke something in her. Not anger. Not pride. Control. I wished her well. I meant it. Then I turned and walked away, not out of pain, but out of clarity. Some chapters end so another life can finally begin. It took me a long time to understand this, but walking away was not weakness. It was the first real act of self-respect I had made in years. For a long time, I believed loyalty meant staying no matter what. That sacrifice automatically earned appreciation. That if you support someone long enough, they will eventually see your value. I was wrong. Loyalty without balance turns into quiet self-erasure. What I learned is simple, but hard. If someone only sees your worth when you are gone, they never truly valued you while you stayed. Love is not a transaction where you invest years and expect guaranteed returns. It is a choice made every day, especially when it is inconvenient. When someone decides you are optional once they reach their goal, believe them the first time. I do not regret the 5 years I gave. They shaped me. They taught me endurance, discipline, and the cost of ignoring your own needs. But I do regret how long I delayed choosing myself. If you are the person holding everything together while being treated as replaceable, hear this clearly. You are not dead weight. You are the foundation. And foundations deserve respect, not disposal. Sometimes the lesson is not about winning them back. Sometimes the lesson is realizing you were never meant to stay. And sometimes, the greatest closure is a life that no longer needs an explanation.